Welcome everybody to Motherhood, Rawful but True, with me, your host, Rainbow Goddess. This podcast offers candid portrayals of the reality of mothering in a Western, individualistic, patriarchal culture.
Welcome to this first episode. It is great to be here and to begin this journey with you listeners. I'm so grateful that you've come. Thank you so much. Firstly, I want to explain why I'm doing this. So I've developed this podcast for 3 reasons. The first reason was to dispel and debunk negative myths about motherhood, which arise from patriarchal mechanisms and individualistic culture. So women take on these myths as part of cultural conditioning, but they cause shame and guilt because they trap mothers within impossible standards, which silences mothers from sharing the true reality of motherhood, which then prevents a revolution in society, and it also leaves mothers vastly unprepared for the reality of mothering. So the podcast is going to explore research and current literature to expose the impact of these myths to help us as a collective heal them. And that leads me to the second reason that this podcast offers a brave space for rawful but true storytelling, because it was only when I got brave enough to share with other mum friends who were brave enough to be honest with me that I realised that there is a dark side to motherhood because of the way culture has individualised and institutionalised motherhood. So these stories and these connections, these authentic connections, were the only thing really that helped me see and feel that I wasn't bad or unable to cope, but that I was suffering symptoms of cultural abandonment. You know, and hearing that it wasn't only me, made me feel better and able to practice resurrection and to keep going. So this podcast aims to show the reality of mothering from first-hand, real, honest accounts to alleviate shame and blame and guilt. And the third reason is to build a matrifocal community for sharing and exploring the meaning and essence of matrescence, which is a term to describe the journey from woman to mother, as adolescence describes the journey from child to adult. And as you'll find out, community was the thing which lifted me out of my crisis, alleviated isolation and improved outcomes for me and my son. And even though I'm lucky to have made this group, I speak to many mothers who are isolated. So in order to bring us together, I've made a Facebook community page titled Motherhood, Rawful but True. Please join, bring your voice and unique experiences to that community hub, and it's going to be a good space to debate and integrate the material in the episodes, because I think there's going to be, some emotional content and some expletives. But, that's motherhood, right? Full of expletives and emotional disturbances. That being said, if you are triggered, then please share and process your feelings with people that you trust. And also, take care of your nervous system. It's heavy, motherhood. And when we get into some of these darker themes, it's going to be felt in the body. So let's all pledge to take care of our nervous systems. And I'm also going to invite online gatherings for deeper connection, so we can spend a bit of time together in a collective live space. So without further ado, welcome. It is such an honour to host this project and such a privilege to have this opportunity to bring a platform for mothers' voices that are so lacking in society. In influential spheres, I'm so grateful to my son and to all the people who've helped us in our journey, and especially to my mum and all she does. And so just taking this opportunity to bless our ancestors and asking that their heroes remember them. So now for the business of this episode. Well, I wanted to take this inaugural birthing episode as an opportunity to introduce myself and to tell you my story of transition from woman to mother. So that's from challenges with my ex, to this 3-day traumatic birth, to a social isolation in lockdown with a tiny baby, and the horror of sleep deprivation and relocation twice to 2 new areas, and then to building and healing in community. And I want to share this story to set the precedent for the ethos of the Rawful but True podcast, and also to embolden you, my beautiful listeners, mothers, friends, to share your story. Because in the words of Margaret J. Wheatley, listening creates relationship. Everybody has a story and everybody wants to tell their story in order to connect. If no one listens, we tell it to ourselves and then we go mad. But more than that, women's healthy development needs quality interrelationships, interconnections and interdependencies to thrive. And this is especially true when those very same women become mothers.
This first episode is being released on the 29th of January 2024, which marks the 4-year anniversary of me becoming a mother, which is a perfect time to offer this story because it's helping me to heal and process another layer because it was hard. 4 years on, I'm still only getting to grips with the trauma and PTSD arising from the transition and my individual circumstances. Before we get into this rawful but true retelling of my personal story, what I want to do is offer some context and to explain just a little bit about where I'm coming from, so my frame of reference. Now, I am primarily a mother, a single mother, not a solo mother, not a lone mother, and I will offer an episode that gets into the differences on that, but a single mum as in I share parental responsibility with my ex, my son's dad. He offers me financial contribution and also takes up some of the childcare. So he has our son 2 nights a week. I have him the rest. Second to being a single mom, I'm also a matricentric, transpersonal, feminist researcher. Now, what does that mean? Well, matricentric feminism is a term that's been developed by Andrea O'Reilly, who is a pioneer in this wave, this new wave of feminism that's coming out, which is all about mothers and what mothers need, which is distinct to women and what women need. So matricentric feminism is a politics and a research field and an activist movement which wants to restore balance and harmony and wants to encourage deeper understanding about the complexities and intricacies in motherhood so that it can develop better social justice and support more of the dimensions of motherhood. Because as we'll get into this episode and over subsequent episodes, there's serious cultural neglect going on. And that's arising from a lack of understanding about the fundamental nature of being a woman. And that comes out from the fact that, because of patriarchy, a lot of science, a lot of model mapping, a lot of the theories around human development have come from men, white, rich, educated men who've been in the upper classes of society, in environments which are devoid of a spirituality and indigenous spirituality and come from materialist paradigms. But with the birthing of transpersonal psychology, we've seen some shifts there because we're starting to understand through the transpersonal lenses spirituality and its inherent place in humanity. We've also looked at the transcendental and brought on, wisdom from Eastern ancient traditions, opening up to indigenous traditions, shamanic traditions from all over the world, and looking to explore this wider understanding of what humans are and their place in the universe. But there's also a shadow in transpersonal psychology, where again, those sciences have been done by men. So we don't really understand the transpersonal development of women, and we don't really understand or support this journey from woman to mother, which is significantly spiritual. It's a hugely transformative epoch in the life of a woman, arguably, the hugest transition that any human ever goes through. To share the body and the soul with another being, to grow it inside, to have all of that interrelationship within the body, one body, and then to birth the child and to become deeply responsible and to tend to the needs of this new human for a very long time. So matricentric transpersonal feminism then is this thread of research with a goal of doing that, making a space to understand the subjective, personal, real-life experiences of women that are becoming mothers, that is looking from this wider perspective of the deeper meaning and in its interrelationship with the divine. The final thing I want to drip in before I get into my story is these negative myths about motherhood. So there are 4 perfect mother myths, and they are: number 1, that the measure of a good mum is a perfect child. Number 2, that mothers are endless founts of nurturance. Number 3, mothers naturally know how to raise children. And number 4, mothers don't get angry. And the 6 bad mother myths are that mothers are inferior to fathers, that mothers need expert advice in order to raise healthy children, that mothers are bottomless pits of emotional neediness, that mother relationships with teenage and adult children are sick if they're close, that mothers are dangerous when they're powerful, and that both stay-at-home mothers and mothers with paid work are inadequate mothers. So these myths rattle around in the collective consciousness, and they cause conditioning, and they cause obedience, and they cause maternal ambivalence and anxiety because they're not real. So let's just take the perfect mother myth number 4, for example: mothers don't get angry. If we hold to that, then mothers that are angry are bad mothers. And that's not true. I get angry a lot, and I speak to other mothers who get angry a lot, and we are good mothers. We are doing a really good job in a very harsh environment with very little resources. I would really love to take this opportunity to share with you my story, my rawful but true story. So this term rawful but true really invites not only myself, but anyone who comes on this podcast and those that listen to appreciate that in this society, Western, industrialistic, individualistic, commercialist, separatist, patriarchal, it's the harshest environment for raising children, I think, than we've ever seen before. There's no tribe, there's no community, there's no village anymore. And the tribe and the community that we exist in is harmful, detrimental, disempowering to matricense. I mean, if you compare it to the Himba tribe in Namibia, this hunter-gatherer community where women are deeply supported to be in their organic nature through conception, birth. It's all seen as a sacred ordeal, held by the women, held by the land. No interventions from clinical environments. There's no shopping. There's no big house that needs cleaning. It's all done in community. These women are held by their mothers through the first month while they're learning about breastfeeding, and they've also been brought up all around it. They're immersed and embedded in a community that's taking care of all things. So imagine the difference on her nervous system compared to the nervous system of a woman who's become a mother in a Western environment, especially when we include birth trauma because of obstetric violence. And obstetric violence is a term that refers to a lack of empathy and a lack of compassion when a woman's going through this huge process of birthing and opening. And so the mothers in that environment have a completely different experience to a mother that's becoming in this Western individualistic patriarchal environment that's laden with these myths and all of these heavy expectations. So with the obstetric violence, on top of the individualism, on top of the expectations, on top of all the workload of women who become mothers, it's no wonder we're getting into these states where we're getting angry. That's what I want to point out more than anything, that this anger that arises when the nervous system goes into fight or flight isn't because women are bad or they're unable to cope. It's because they've been abandoned by culture. So that's where I'm coming from. So I hope all of that just offers a framework, a bedrock for contextualizing who I am, where I'm coming from, and the aims of this podcast. And now that's all done, I would really love to take this opportunity to share with you my story, my rawful but true story. So, I'm going to tell you some things that are quite hard to hear. I'm going to tell you about, I've shouted at my baby. I'm going to tell you about how I've bashed myself. And what I want to do is say that this is awful but true. This is a candid portrayal. None of this means that I'm a child abuser. None of this means that I'm a bad mom. None of this means that I'm a failure. What I'm doing by sharing this is explaining, giving the evidence to show how much cultural abandonment is impacting women and kids. So I invite you to step in to this rawful, open-hearted space as you listen to this story and see me as a human that suffered at being alone, at being isolated in motherhood. So my baby was 8 months old when I became a single mother. This was during the COVID lockdown. And around that same time, I began my master's program. Became a single mother because my relationship with my baby's dad was fraught with conflict. Shortly before we became pregnant, I'd only just recently moved in. We were a very new couple and it went bad quickly. It became quite abusive, emotionally abusive. There was a lot of arguments and I was in and out and in and out and in and out of that environment. I'd go and stay on friends' couches. I'd go and stay with my mum. And then towards the end of pregnancy, my hips started to disintegrate. So I was on crutches and I became increasingly vulnerable. And he started to shut down and become even less compassionate and empathetic. So I wanted this baby out. I was tired of being with Dan in that house. I wanted to get my body back together. I wanted to get off these crutches, get this hip pain out of my hip. So I pushed for some intervention. On my due date, I pushed to have a stretch and sweep, which is where a midwife enters the vagina and tries to knock the plug away from the cervix. I regret that because it caused what we call a spiral of intervention. So the knock-on from that was that it took 3 days. It took 3 days. I had to go into hospital after 24 hours because my waters had broke, but my child wasn't coming and they were worried about infection and my world came crashing down. And I had prepared a bag because I was so sure that I could do it on my own at home, that I would not be going to hospital. I did not prepare a hospital bag, which meant my ex had to pack a bag. And he didn't even pack knickers. He packed dirty nighties, didn't even pack knickers. Anyway, hospital intervention with the team, the hospital team, just not allowing me to be in my zone, not allowing me to go primal. My mum and Dan, both of them, saying I needed to respect the doctor and they weren't advocating for me. So I ended up getting in my anger because I needed to protect myself. I couldn't trust these people. And the doctors were like aliens, unempathetic, that weren't listening to my needs. They were just talking at me. And it was making me more frustrated and taking me out of the zone. It was almost like an alien abduction. I told them all to get out, that I didn't want them in there. And I made the midwife guard the door. I told them all to get out. My mum, my ex, the doctors, everybody. And I had one friend, Boudica, who's my son's godmother. She was with me and I smudged the space. I put Aretha Franklin on and started to change the lyrics to reflect my situation. And then I felt like I could get into a groove. By this point, I'd had no sleep the night before. I'd been contracting regularly for almost 48 hours. I was pretty exhausted, in a lot of pain, and quite scared of the pain, actually. And so they gave me diamorphine, and that was very trippy So it put me in an altered state of consciousness. And on reflection, I wish I hadn't done that. What I wish was that one of the midwives had said, you can do this. This is going to hurt really bad, but it's still going to work even if you have the drugs, because there's no drugs we can give you that's going to stop this pain. But like every single woman who's done this before, you're going to do it and you're going to come out the other side. If you have these drugs, it's still going to work bad, but it's going to put you in an altered state where you're not going to be able to meet your baby. It's also going to affect your child. So I wish they'd have said that, but they didn't. And I was vulnerable then. I had no one advocating for me. My brain was shutting down as I was going into this more primal state, and I just wanted relief. So I became disempowered by taking the drugs. And then it just went on from there. And so I managed to get myself into a quiet zone. And then things ramped up a lot. And Dan came back in, and I told him off and told him he had to help and do exactly what I said. Otherwise, there was no point in being there. And I remember being very fiery and having to be very direct and very much in my anger, which meant there was no chance of me having any kind of ecstatic birth experience and get myself through in survival mode rather than relaxing and opening and embracing the surges and allowing my body to do the work. You know, that's the best way to birth a baby. But I was in survival mode, and adrenaline fights against oxytocin. Oxytocin is relaxed, love, open. Oxytocin is what we need to birth our babies well and naturally and without really intense pain, without fear, you know. And so that was really, really horrible. And it was going on and on and on and on. And we'd gone through the night again, and it started to become daylight again. And all of a sudden, before I knew it, you know, they'd put catheters in me, in my hands, and I kept pulling them. I kept knocking them out because I wanted to move around, but they couldn't monitor me if I was moving around. So then they had to put this hook inside my baby's head, which again just really freaked me out in that moment. But they were saying they needed to monitor him. They needed to monitor him. And so I had to have it in and making me feel bad if I didn't let them do it. And so there were a lot of moments in there where I sacrificed what I wanted for my child because I was victim to the powers that be in this institutional environment that turns birth into a medical emergency. And I wish I could do it all again, but I can't. Anyway, in the last throes, I could hear his heartbeat on the monitor. And every time I had a big contraction and I was pushing, his heartbeat would slow down and go slower and slower and slower and slower. And then that's when the midwives would say things like, baby's not happy, I'm getting a bit worried now. Again, I felt like I was losing my autonomy. So there was one position I was in where I was the midwife and my ex were holding this scarf and squeezing these pressure points on the top of my buttocks. And it was tiny bit supportive. The pain I felt was excruciating. Some of the screams I made, I've never heard myself make those screams. It hurt so bad. But there was this one position I was in, this squat, which felt natural and organic and right. And at that point, the midwife started to say she got worried and that she had to turn me around on my back. And I remember from the doula training that the back is the worst place for a woman to birth a baby. She should be on all fours or on her side or stood or squatting, you know, so that the baby can come out of the canal because the pelvis scoops up and around. So it's like the baby has to come out through going up a slide rather than coming down. So it's all counterintuitive, counter to the female body. But you know, this is what's happened when men have got involved in birth. We've taken the ownership of that arena away from nature and placed it into the hands of a clinical environment. Oh, and so we get to this point where I'm on my back, and then all of a sudden, this doctor and his mate, who I fell out with hours earlier, probably the day before, have emerged back in the room at the bottom of the bed, and he's messing around with forceps, whispering in my midwife's ear. Now I'm in and out of consciousness, going on about, no, I don't want any fucking alcohol from Quicksave, and get that cat back in, because I was tripping, because I was on this diamorphine. I wasn't cognizant. I'd snap in and out of cognition and awareness. And I remember this feeling of like, if I don't get this baby out now, this man is going to put these horrible metal, he's going to rape me with this metal implement and clamp my baby and pull my baby out of me. So I had to push then like nobody's business. And I caught my own child, and I felt this almost like, I mean, if you're meat eaters and you've ever snapped a chicken leg bone, that sound of the bone against the bone, it sounded like that as my child came through my pelvis. But he was there, and he was on my chest. And I made everyone sing his song, and I sang his song to him. But there were these other midwives that wanted to get involved, and before I knew it, they were over and they were rubbing him with these towels, and I didn't want them to do that. I could imagine it scratching his skin, and that being his first experience of entering this world, these scratchy towels on his skin, and I didn't want that for him. And I'd crocheted him a blanket. I wanted that to be the first thing, and then there was this hat on his head that I didn't make and I didn't ask for, and there was so much that went on. I mean, I could write reams and reams about that, but it was a traumatic birth experience. The people in there, like one woman, she was dressing my baby. I needed some sleep. Like, this was the third day now, 2 nights, all that pain, all that emotional trauma, all that feeling like I've been abducted by aliens and losing my autonomy, and the weirdness of being in and out of consciousness, you know, and then meeting my baby, and I just, at that moment, I couldn't stay awake anymore, and I missed the golden hour, which I deeply grieve. I missed the golden hour, which is where a mother sits with this newborn child and then bonds onto it, you know, physiologically, neurophysiologically. There are pathways that are created in the brain after the birth, before the placenta arrives, and while the placenta is being birthed. There's these other aspects that are going on, and spiritually being able to just sit in that moment of awe. Wow, this is my child I've been waiting so long to meet, to have this sacred moment at the beginning of their life, outside of the womb, to really drop in to the love and the bond. And I didn't get to have that because I was so exhausted. If the midwife had said, don't have this medicine, it's not going to help much, it's only going to take the edge off, and it's still going to be really hard. I didn't get this natural imprint of the bond. And then when I did have a tiny nap and I woke up, my child was being dressed by this woman, and she called him naughty because he was wiggling his arm when she was trying to put him. And so I had to speak up for that. Like, how dare you call my child naughty? He's not naughty. Fuck off. Fuck off. All of you, get away from me and my baby. You know, but I ended up stuck in that place for 7 days with people who had no idea about breastfeeding, forcing me to drip feed him formula, which made me feel like a failure. And I was trapped in this hospital, and they said things like I couldn't take my baby outside because it was a health and safety risk. And so I couldn't breathe fresh air, and I couldn't sleep because they kept coming in to check our vitals and to give us medication. And they were also concerned about my son's immunity and wanting to give him antibiotics because they thought we had an infection. And I was saying, you know, he's got these numbers because his antibiotics were given to me in the birth because you thought I had an infection. So that's why his immunity is compromised, because you've given him them things. And so they kept coming in, they'd cut his foot every day for 2 days to check these numbers in his blood. Imagine that. And then they also wanted to give him this spinal tap, which I'd fully rejected and considered, and I rejected. And then this doctor came back in again and made us really think about it again and made us feel bad for not doing it, which meant I took my son for a spinal tap and he didn't need one. It was just awful. Just awful. So that's where we started. And then I've got this unempathetic, patriarchal bigot expecting me to do everything around the house and breastfeed, and just still really in the shell shock of it all. And the first night I got back after them 7 days in hospital, which was awful, my milk finally came in. But that first night I had a night terror, and instead of comforting me and supporting me, his father got really angry and basically slapped his hands on the side of my head and squoze my head. And I just felt so isolated and terrified and unheld. And then 6 weeks later, the country went into lockdown, which meant I was stuck on this farm with this guy who was going out to work every day and expecting me to do everything in the home, while I was exclusively breastfeeding our baby, waking up every hour in the night, and just with severe PTSD from it all. Oh, so it was awful, and I needed to get out of there. I needed to get out of that environment with my baby, but it was locked down and it was hard. So I managed that first summer. We managed, and then things started to get worse, and I would get in the car, pack our things, go and spend some time at my mother's, go back to the farm, have some more rows, feel more abused, leave, go back, and it was just no good. I remember once feeling like I'd overstayed my welcome at my family home because having a baby, waking everyone up, they're in their own routines, and just very challenging. So I ended up one night spending a night in a hotel with my baby and a dog because I just couldn't go back to him. I just couldn't go back there. And then social services were really helpful. So we ended up getting put in a temporary flat. Now, this was in Cornwall, which was in the middle of nowhere, 45-minute drive from his dad and a 45-minute drive from my family. And there was someone, I'm not judging, but there was someone who smoked crack, who lived 2 doors down, and you could hear them do this really big cough. I think it's because they were burning the throat on the pipe. But I remember being able to hear that and putting my hands over my baby's ears, just praying that he wouldn't wake up. And there were a guy who lived underneath who was gaming through the night and doing bad Elvis impressions. That was when my son was 8 months old. And it was then, end of September, beginning of October in 2020, that I started my master's in consciousness, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology. So imagine this, I'm sleep deprived, I'm going through this breakup, he's resenting me, communication is nigh on impossible. I've managed to agree some sort of terms. He comes, but a hostile environment. I would trying to do lectures, trying to do my assignments, and I've got this baby. Dealing with all of that. And I also was trying my best to do what I could to support my nervous system. And I was living under the weight of these expectations of culture and everything like I mapped out at the beginning. But it was awful. And I remember before we got put in that flat, there was 3 nights where we were supposed to stay in this B&B to get us out of the house and somewhere so that we could start to move in the system. And this B&B, it was a place for people with alcohol and homeless people, and the environment there I felt really vulnerable. But that first night when we went into that hotel, I remember it being the first time that I felt anger towards my child. Now, I have to forgive myself for this, but I did. I got right in his face and I gritted my teeth and I said to him, "You better go to sleep," like that. And then I was shocked at what had happened. And then we spent these 4 months in this grim, hostile environment. And I didn't know anybody in the area. I had a couple of friends around me at that time, and they came a few times. I remember my mum came a couple of times. But we spent our first Christmas there and my son's first birthday there. It was a grim time. And during that time, and I was coping with all that, and his father was being hostile towards me. That was the first time I started to self-harm. Now, remember, I've known about therapy, shamanic work, plant medicine work, done lots of trauma work. I know the fundamentals. I understand deeply personal development. I understand the nervous system and how to regulate and support it. But there was nothing I could do to stop this self-harming. It was like a violent outburst that I turned against myself. So imagine my nervous system's gone into fight mode, which I think it got stuck in during my birth experience because I had to fight for myself there. So that was kind of like the neurological program that got laid down: anger, rage, protection, survival. And what happened was I would feel really, really bad that I couldn't do it, or that I felt overwhelmed, or that I resented, and that I was having these images, and I'd turn against myself in these fits of madness. And it looked like bashing my thighs like a gorilla pounds on another gorilla or pounds on the earth. I would pound on the top of my thighs, pound and pound and pound and pound on them. And then I would have these massive bruises down the front of my thighs. And then the other thing what I'd do was scratch. So I'd scratch the back of my neck, scratch my face with my fingernails, like I was trying to rip my face or rip the back of my neck off. And the other thing I would do is bang my head against the wall. And also punch myself with the bottom of my fists, like hit myself with closed fists on my face. And there was this one point where I hit myself in the eyeball and then my vision went fuzzy and I thought, oh my God, I've blinded myself. How am I going to explain this to people? So these moments of madness would happen where I just feel so overwhelmed and obviously need this release of tension. And I turned against myself violently. And I'd never experienced that before. And that's when I had this mystical experience. So there was one night where I was sat with my baby, holding him to the breast, and I had to sit on the edge of this bed and keep my knee up with my toe. So you tense in your body and you're holding this child. And that particular night, I wasn't angry and I wasn't in a state of overwhelm. What I would do is I'd go and I'd pick him up and I'd hold him to the breast and I would sing these songs. There were 3 of them that I'd made for him. So this particular night, I'm sat there singing and I sensed hands on me. I could feel them, hands on me. And these were the hands of women, hands of the women, ancestors, the women who'd done this before, the women who would be there in the past, supporting the mother to endure, to keep going. These hands, I started to visualize then that they were women, ancestors holding me, that they were singing, that they were giving me this transmission of endurance. But in that moment, I had this revelation, this deep revelation of understanding, like being raised in this individualistic culture where women's development and women's needs have all been mapped out by men who don't understand. And where motherhood is this institution, and where trauma and psychological overwhelm is pathologized as a mental illness. All of this meant that I was culturally conditioned to expect that I should be able to do all of this on my own. And if I couldn't, then I was at best sick or at worst a failure. And I had this revelation, like how inorganic that is, how that's not the way nature intended the experience of motherhood to be. And so in that moment, I had this realization, and also bear in mind, touching in now into the first few months of my master's, where I'm reading literature about women's spirituality, about patriarchy, about cross-cultural examples of motherhood, about conscious mothering. Reading these articles that emphasize women's spirituality, that it's relational and interdependent, and that immanence is fundamentally important to women's development, and that applies to motherhood, that supported me to understand this impact of the lack of community on my maternal experience. And so I realised the profound necessity of belonging, and how inorganic it was to be raising a baby alone. And then I couldn't stop wondering how different things would have been if I was held, or if other mothers felt this deep longing to be held. And then if they did, does that mean this interdependency of women's development, is fundamentally important in motherhood? And if so, what does that mean for our society at large, where we have completely individualized motherhood and mother work, where we've developed these myths that make it so a woman feels obligated and is solely responsible for the upbringing of this child. And so my thesis in the end became about that. My question was, what does spiritual community mean to single spiritual but not religious mothers? Yeah, when I got this thread, I could start to let go a little bit of the punishing myself. And I wanted to tell other people about this revelation, because they might be punishing themselves. And then I started to realise how much people are suffering in the dark of the night with the babies on their own. And I made a piece of media art,
which you can watch in their Facebook page,
to frame this crisis that I was going through, to show how the sleep deprivation was causing me so much trouble, and the lack of support, the lack of empathy, the lack of education around the reality of motherhood, the lack of a reality check about motherhood, because it's hidden in our culture, because women are shamed into silence. So this revelation, like, people in the night, like me, not all the time. I mean, this is like, I'd say around 15-20% of the time that I was in a heightened state. The rest of the time I managed. And sometimes I felt, blissful love, and my nipples didn't hurt so much, and I was resourced so that it felt nice, and I could feel those, idealized maternal vibrations. But around 15-20% of the time, I would get in panic when my child cried in the night. And the first couple of wake ups I could do relatively calm, sing to him, be all loving, and put him in bed again. And then I'd start to get a little bit more, and then I'd, manage just to get to sleep. Then I'd start to get in these states of anxiety. And this is when we'd moved into our permanent home where we're at now. And there were this phase where I was questioning, should I sleep train this baby? Because sometimes I'm going in and I'm absolutely losing it with him. He's in his cot by now. I'd put him in a cot, I'd got him out of my bed just so that I could sleep better. I would go in, get him out, put him on the breast, put him back in, go back to bed, and we'd do that dance in the night. It got to this point where I was so overwhelmed one night, I decided to start bottle feeding him in the night so that I could get him down quicker and get him back to sleep quicker. So that's what we did. So I'd start making formula in a flask so it was warm before we went to bed. Then I would go and I would give him a bottle. And then he'd always fall asleep sooner if I gave him a bottle. And then I wanted to start weaning him off the bottles so that I could start to sleep. And then that's when I thought about sleep training. The reason I thought about sleep training was because this one night I went in, and it must have been the 6th or 7th time. And I was just so frustrated. I remember getting all of the sides of the cot and shaking myself on the sides. To go to fucking sleep! Like that. And I threw this flask and broke the flask. And I remember starting then just shouting, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. Obviously, that's not going to make him stop crying, right? And have these moments, of shell shock at this explosive behaviour. And then ground, take some deep breaths in the shell shock, come back down, come back to my heart. And then I could be that loving maternal presence, what he needed, soothe us both again, sing, calm him down, and get to the morning. And another time I was quite enraged, rawful but true. Another time I was quite enraged, I smashed the pan on the cooker and I broke the glass on the top of my cooker. So now I only have 3 rings, and this smashed cooker, it serves as a reminder of the rage that was brought on by, what I'm saying and what I'm arguing is cultural neglect of mothers and motherhood. And when I get into the episode on sleep deprivation, I want to share with you some research, for example, from Canada about breastfeeding and self-harm prevalence in women. And I want to also get into how if you type in help with sleep and to Google, these models and these charts all plot, go to bed at the same time and get up at the same time and have this nice sleep routine. But nowhere does it say, oh yeah, being a mum, being a parent is a massive factor in sleep deprivation. And there's nothing you can do about that unless you sleep train your kid. Anyway, I digress. But we'll get into sleep deprivation and we'll get into research on self-harm. And again, because we don't understand motherhood and because feminism is still focused in the workplace, it's not actually focusing on women's development, then self-harm is mainly thought about in adolescence. People don't imagine mothers to be harming themselves when they've got these beautiful little babies there, but it's really going on. But I don't think anyone wants to look at that. Serious, isn't it? It's serious and it's dark, and this dark mother archetype, it's where the Medusa archetype comes from, this idea of mothers that kill their own children. There is a lawyer and a psychologist that have worked together to write a book that explains sometimes, as hard as it is to understand, mothers kill their own children through love because they just cannot go on anymore and they don't want to leave the children. So they kill the kids and they kill themselves. And that's so bleak that we've got to that. It's no wonder we've invented sleep training, because the work of mothering with sleep deprivation is so challenging. And so what my research found in the end was that it doesn't take a village to raise a child. It actually takes a village to raise a mother. And the village is the mother. It's not one woman. The village is the mother. And often it's not because somebody else can breastfeed the kid or somebody else can look after the kid. It's because the woman is being fed resources to endure. She's being supported as an individual in this overwhelming demand on her nervous system, on her psychological resources. And so that was the revelation. And now as I record this, it's 2 weeks before the anniversary of my becoming a mother and my son's 4th birthday. And we're all right. In his second winter, when we moved into this house and we started to settle, I embarked on a restorative yoga teacher training course for 3 months. At that time, I was using cannabis as a crutch, which is helping me to regulate my nervous system and to fall asleep quicker in those periods of time where I managed to get asleep, helped me to fall asleep quicker. But I was still self-harming.
Within 1 month of starting that training, I had managed to let go of the crutch and stop self-harming. And it was just through learning about the inner nurturer and really deepening into the softness of the rest. Not intensive healing, not psychotherapy, not somatic healing, not pushing and being really intense with the emotional release whenever I got space for that. No, it was the deep rest of doing nothing in those restorative pauses that unwound that complete overwhelm in the nervous system, which was wanting to wipe itself out and punish in myself.
I've never felt such deep self-loathing, and I've never felt so ugly either. That's another episode that we'll get into, the rawful but true of body changing when you become a mum. Some women are lucky and others go through some really challenging physiological changes. I'm sitting now with more weight than I've ever had in my entire life. Now, before becoming a mum, I was always quite slim, felt very attractive woman, and never had any doubt about, my prettiness, my beauty. And then becoming a mum and living in this mum body, what I call it, my mum body, I felt ugly for the first time in my life. And then on top of all the mothering and the personal development and this existential question of how can I be less angry, and also this acceptance of only can do so much in my limits, and also wanting to have enough money so that we can live well and go on adventures, and I can nurture his body and feed him good food and, teach him about the world. On top of all of that, now I've also got to look at fitness training, at dieting, at, trying to get my body back in shape. And it's hard to do physical exercise when you're exhausted. Oh, it's been a crazy, crazy ride. But we're all right. We're all right. In this new town, I managed to meet a group of women because I put on a shamanic mum and toddler group, which was rooted in earth-based spiritual principles, rooted in the cyclical wisdom of nature. And we came together, and because we were sharing deeply and openly and rawfully, candidly in that environment, we were able to bond deeply, and now we're a little tribe, and we get together on the Sabbaths of the Celtic Wheel of the Year, and we do ceremony with the children, and we relate to each other. And this is where I want to drop in that I interpret a third way of the motherhood word. Rich and O'Reilly say motherhood is, first of all, the journey a woman takes to becoming a mum and the nurturing she does in her mother work. The second definition is the institution of motherhood as it's been developed in a patriarchal, Western, industrialized environment, which is laden with these negative myths that serve an economy that keep the mums silent with shame, taking on all of the burden and not seeking to revolutionize culture because they don't want to feel like they're not doing a good job. That's the institution of motherhood. But when spiritual but not religious mothers come together that celebrate authenticity, that celebrate working with trauma and suffering as a part of personal development and not pathologizing it as a mental illness, when those women come together with their children to practice the spirituality together, then what we feel is like motherhood, like a sisterhood. So where we see mothers as a subcategory of women, we also see spiritual mothers as a subcategory of spiritual women, because they need their own space and they need their own community with the shared values and the shared experience. So once spiritual women become mothers, then instead of having a sisterhood, what they need is a motherhood. So I frame motherhood in this third interpretive way, which is similar to what I mentioned earlier of the Himba women in Namibia, close to how nature intended it. Yeah, the hope at the end of this podcast, really is to say that my son is beautiful, is thriving, is an expressive, rambunctious, confident, happy little soul the majority of the time. And even though we've had a lot of ups and downs and I've been through it, we've managed to find this community and we're doing okay. We're doing okay. I've finished the masters. I'm currently doing a full hatha yoga teacher training. I'm currently involved in a community project where we're going to train to be forestry school leaders. And now I'm just wanting to share this revelation and share this safe space and, create an environment where we can hear more of these stories of how it actually is in the home, so we can dispel some of these myths of motherhood. I'm not 100% overwhelmingly in love with my kid
100% of the time.
but I'm a good mum. And even though the women in my study, some of them expressed what I'm expressing, like this overwhelm, this dark mother archetype emerges from this cultural neglect. It's not to do that the mother can't cope or that the mother's bad. It's that culture has made it so harsh to be a mother that the mother has so much overwhelm that she can't. It's impossible to expect us to keep our calm and be compassionate and overwhelming and loving all the time. And sometimes my kid does things and I think, God, you're just weird. Or that grosses me out, or he'll ask me silly questions or get upset about things which are just ridiculous. It really winds me up sometimes. And sometimes, this is another theme we can get into as well, like play and using cartoons and ways that we entertain and engage and soothe our children, because we can't always be the thing that entertains and soothes our children. We've got to get on with stuff. So like sometimes I'm cooking tea and I will put him in front of a cartoon. Sometimes I need to get off and do something and he just starts with this tantrum. I can't sit there for half an hour. and soothe him and talk to him about it and help him really understand and come to some sort of completion with his own little trauma. Sometimes I have to just pass him on to something or something else. So we'll call it Auntie Netflix, Uncle Prime, Uncle Amazon Prime Video. You know, we'll use cartoons sometimes. And he'll even say now, the cartoon will make me feel better. And I just have to let that go because I'm doing my best. But he also is very empathetic. You know, we've been in situations where I've been healing and he's been with me and he's saying, "Why are you crying, mummy?" And I'm saying, "No, I'm healing." And he's so empathetic. You know, he'll pass me some water. This will make you feel better. Or he'll give me a cuddle, or he'll wipe my tears. You know, he's got empathy, and it's through the rupture and repair. So we'll get to this final golden nugget at the end of this journey that we've been on. Just to say that, you know, rupture and repair is really important. I'm glad that I lose it with my kids sometimes, because then he can see that people can get angry and be really frightening, but they're not going to abandon you. That you can make mistakes, you can do silly things that piss people off, you can do things which hurt your mummy, but she's still going to love you. She's still going to be there. You know, at the end, if you do this rupture and repair, like the other day, I'll leave you with this nugget. So the other day we were in the car, I just picked him up from his dad, and sometimes he's dysregulated because they just offer him different care to what I do. But it's different, the transition is different. And so often for the first 24 hours when I get him back, he's emotionally dysregulated, which just means he gets stressed, he cries, he pours it all out, and it's a lot to hold. So imagine I've been on my own for a couple of days, I'm regulated, I've had a peaceful time being myself, and then he comes home and it's just this wave of emotion and chaos and demand, which is difficult to shift into for both of us. But the other day in the car, that's what was happening. We were playing a really nice game, and then all of a sudden he said, "I want a turn." I said, "Okay, you have a turn." But I think then he got triggered because we were playing a game of literacy and guessing these rhyming words. And even though he can understand it, he couldn't make one. He's not got the cognition to make one yet. And so instead of being able to express that, he just got really angry at me. And I just saying, "I've said you can have a turn, have a turn." But then he started to unpack it, and I'd really upset him, and it was my fault. And I was saying, "It's not my fault. I haven't done anything wrong," and trying to express. Then I was getting triggered. And in the end, he started to get really explosive, started to kick the car stereo and be quite angry and aggressive in his behaviour. So then I got hold of his legs. "Please don't kick my car. It's okay to be upset, but it's not okay to kick mummy's car." You know, these kind of more gentle parenting tactics. And then he just carried on, and he was calling me a stupid mummy. So do you know what? For the first time in 4 years, I turned around and I said, "You're a stupid son." And he didn't like that, so he hit me then. And do you know what? That was good, because it enabled me afterwards to go, "I fundamentally do not believe that you're stupid. I want you to know," told him, "I want you to know that I don't actually think you're stupid. You're very," I mean, I tell him this all the time, how proud I am of him, how amazing he is, how intelligent he is. You know, I know I'm using this podcast to talk about the dark and the rawful and the awful and the true and honest and, you know, the raw side of it all. But really, like I said before, 85% is beautiful and amazing. And I'm a great mum. I really, want to say that I am a great mum. I do very well on little resources, and I give him great examples, and, I've really done the best with our situation, and every day I'm doing something else to work on myself, to try and show up more and have more capacity, whilst also, trying to tackle this gap in the literature about motherhood and to be a match-centric feminist. But the main thing is I was able to say to him the truth. I just did that to show you what it feels like. I don't actually think you're stupid. And so it feels like he's going through this next developmental phase, and people are starting to treat him a bit differently as well because he's older now. And that's going to be hard for him to navigate, but he's got to learn boundaries. And that's, going to help him build resilience in the world. And, we could go through all of those things and we're still so close. I think my mum never showed me her anger and never did any rupture and repair. And I struggle with interrelationships because I don't have faith. I didn't really know my mother. She just suppressed all of her emotions. So we got this shell of a woman. We didn't really get a full spectrum woman. And so now I don't really know how to deal with my anger. And anger is there because I haven't been taught how to deal with it. But that's not her fault. That's just the way it was for her and her development. And, I love her to bits. We've come on leaps and bounds, me and my mum. And I think she's an amazing woman. She's very inspiring. And, her work ethic is beautiful. She's a great manifester of her dreams, and she's very dedicated and, seems to be quite calm a lot of the time. But I wonder, part of it is our genetic makeup as well, isn't it? It's not just nature. There's nurture and nature that feed in, and epigenetics that feed in, and who we are in our personality. All this mixes, doesn't it, to make us who we are, and our emotional resilience. But anyway, what I'm basically saying is that rupture and repair is really important. And if we didn't have those moments of breakdown, we wouldn't have the opportunity to repair. So he wouldn't get to know the truth of who I am. He wouldn't be able to see, women and in the cycle, and he wouldn't get to see that people can be angry at you but still love you, and that's important for us all to learn, isn't it? That it's okay to be angry and to learn what to do with that anger, to emote consciously without harming yourself and without harming other people, and to learn about regulation and try and live a more organic life. I'm teaching him all of that as I'm learning it. So I think, again, this current generation of parenting, where we've got all these different parental models, where we're, raising our consciousness, where we've got these models of free schooling more than ever before, homeschooling. We're reclaiming, aren't we, more of the organic expression of our humanity and our child rearing as these spiritual but not religious parents, or conscious parents. So I'm really celebrating the rupture and repair that comes from all of these hard, brutal moments with our kids. And just, wanting everyone to know that you're doing the best you can, and that's it. You've cracked it. There is no perfect parent. It's a myth. It doesn't exist. Practice resurrection. When you lose it, let go of guilt and shame fast, because it's overwhelming. Like Einstein said, a goldfish will never be able to climb a tree. Well, one parent or a nuclear parent family is never ever going to be able to just handle everything 100% of the time. Without support of that network, without a sangha, without that spiritual community that's fundamentally supporting you to live to your beliefs and to have the resources as well, to manifest your beliefs in your life, that's another ball of contention, isn't it? It's hard, isn't it? The financial resources, the emotional resources, they're just not available for many, 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 many of us. You must be very, very, very lucky and very blessed if you don't shout at your kid. If you feel like you can be patient and tolerant, you must be so well held and have been able to deal with a lot of your stuff from your life. What I'm wanting more than anything from this podcast is to normalize how hard it is. I want to create a safe space for these conversations and for us to share the darker side of motherhood.
Oh, here we are at the end then. What a journey. That was cathartic. Thank you so much for listening, for interrelating with me and interconnecting with me through your silence, through your ears, through your heart. I deeply appreciate it. Maybe you have had a traumatic birth. Maybe you have a traumatic story. Maybe you're still processing. Maybe your birth was ecstatic. Maybe you didn't have your birth yet. Either way, I pray that all mothers are held and blessed and have the resources they need to be in the perfect expression of their own organic, unique manner of mothering in birth and every moment after. I really hope you've got something from this experience, and please get in touch in the Facebook page to tell me your story, to connect with others, to share ideas and supportive feedback. The next episodes are going to cover topics such as what is matrescence and what does it look like. I'm going to do a special episode on my research findings and where I'm going next. We'll look at shadow work and its place in matrescence. We'll do mum guilt and shame. We'll look at the rest of the false myths of motherhood in depth and why we take them on, even to our detriment. We'll explore tantrums and the struggle to apply gentle or conscious parenting tactics when we're in the fire with our kids. We'll look at sleep deprivation, breastfeeding and self-harm. We'll look at why it's so hard to get out of the house with toddlers and the impact on mums when fathers fuck off, and how we feel about the government's lack to enforce financial or physical paternal contributions. We'll also explore challenges and gifts of menstruation in motherhood, the violence of toddlers, mother wounds and legacy burdens, lone, single and solo mamas, the challenges and differences. Many, many, many more topics and questions are going to arise as we move through this. So welcome suggestions, and I also welcome donations. I'm going to set up a Patreon page for this podcast, and that really helps me to be able to spend the time to produce them, interviewing people and marketing. So last to say then, this journey of the last 4 years has been the hardest and most wonderful of my life. I'm deeply grateful for my gorgeous, loving, healthy, vibrant, sensitive and sacred child. And I just want to thank him for being my teacher and guide, and for his unconditional love, and for showing me strength and how to grow through humbling myself. So, I am Rainbow, and I've been rawful but true. Could you? There has been some triggering content in this podcast, so please seek professional help if you are really struggling with some of the topics here. Also, please reach out in the Facebook group to the community and to myself. Thank you.